ICHRRF. I welcome you all. Good morning to everyone. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I'm the President and Chairman Board of Directors of ICHRRF. Welcome to another lecture in the ICHRRF Speaking Up series. ICHRRF is a non-profit organization. It stands for International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. It's a US-based non-profit organization that is focused on upholding human rights and religious freedom all over the world through continuous monitoring, policy intervention, and collaboration. We are focused on educational, research, legal, human rights advocacy, and charitable purposes, and strive to be an advocate for the human rights and religious freedom of underrepresented communities across the world. We believe that humankind can no longer afford to be selectively vocal about the rights of only a specific set of people. A humane and just world necessitates fair treatment of all living beings. Our focus is on indigenous rights and freedom, free speech, and their cultural and philosophical preservation. Some of our initiatives include monitoring violations of the freedom and sanctity of the religious and philosophical minorities across the world, research into documentation of the culture, history, and challenges faced by such communities, policy recommendations on human rights, religious diversity, and pluralism to international organizations, agencies, national and local governments, and collaboration to support the cultural and philosophical diversity across the entire world. Our distinguished speaker today is Professor Ved P. Nanda. We are blessed to have him as a member of our board of directors, as well as chairperson of our international advisory board of the ICHRRF. Professor Ved Nanda will be speaking on the topic of plight of Roma people in Europe. It is a sad story on the discrimination, persecution, and challenges faced by the Roma people of Europe, both historically over the last 10 centuries, as well as today in 21st century. Professor Ved Nanda and a group of his postdoc students at University of Denver Center for International and Comparative Law have been researching the persecution and discrimination of Roma people. So he is the most knowledgeable person in this field. I think words are not enough for me to describe Professor Ved Nanda and his achievements. He is John Evans Distinguished University Professor at the University of Denver, Professor Emeritus and Director of the Ved Nanda Center for International and Comparative Law at University of Denver Sturm College of Law. He has taught thousands of individuals in the College of Law, Faculty of Law during the last 55 years since beginning his teaching career. He also carries a legacy of selfless service, and his students carry the same legacy of selfless service through his devotion to their advancement and upliftment as legal leaders of the world. Professor Nanda was born in Gujranwala in Punjab in 1934. His family were forced to leave that part of the world in 1947. As a 13-year-old boy, he witnessed it all. Very sad story of ethnic cleansing and genocide when the family was forced to move, leave all their possessions, and come as refugees in India. In the language we use, he has had lived experience as a refugee, as a victim of forced migration. He received his BA and MA degrees from Punjab University, later on studied at Faculty of the Law and Delhi University, where he received gold medal for the first place in his class of 400 students. So he has both LLB, LLM from Delhi University in India, and LLM from Northwestern University School of Law in Chicago. He was a graduate fellow at Yale Law School in New Haven, Connecticut. He has many doctorate degrees given in honorary capacity from Soka University in Tokyo, Bundelkhand University in Jhansi in India. Professor Nanda has received numerous national and international awards. He has authored or co-authored 24 books and over 225 chapters in law review articles in international journals. He writes a column for Denver Post. He is a regular commentator in both electronic and print media. In fact, he has been awarded with so many awards that I cannot list them. President of India awarded him Padma Bhushan, one of the highest civilian awards given by Government of India. American Bar Association International Law Section has conferred on him Louis B. Sohn Award for Distinguished and Long-Standing Scholarship. He holds many leadership positions in the global international law community, including World Jurist Association, American Society of International Law, International Law Association, American Law Institute, American Bar Association's Human Rights Center, section of international law. He has served as a US delegate to the World Federation of United Nations Associations in Geneva and on Governing Council of United Nations Association of the USA. He is an officer and board member in several international and national NGOs. He is also chairperson of the Oberoi Foundation for Religious Studies. I actually went to University of Denver's website and tried to find his curriculum vitae, and I found that it was 19 pages long till 2017. So if you add last 3 years, I don't know how many pages that will sort of fill. And as I said, he's member of Board of Directors of ICHRRF and chairperson of International Advisory Board of the ICHRRF. I would say that words have limitations. The word distinguished does not distinguish our distinguished speaker. He's an erudite yet humble scholar par excellence. His beacon of hope and inspiration and aspiration and guidance for our organization. His hard work and perseverance inspire so many young scholars. And he's always optimistic, cheerful, and never gets weighed down by adversity. So before I hand over the session to Professor Ved Nanda, there are some housekeeping rules for our audience. Kindly unmute yourself to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode, because if accidentally you are unmuted and your cell phone starts ringing, it will disturb the speaker. Please do not try to interrupt our esteemed speaker. Only the members of audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions at the end of the presentation. No anonymous questioners, please. Please send all your questions by chat function or through Q&A function. Please be very precise and specific in asking a question. And please don't send comments in the form of a monologue. And for your information, we are recording this session. It will be available later on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. We routinely record all the sessions. So ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege and honor to present Professor Ved Nanda to all of you, and you will be enthralled by his lecture on the plight of Roma in Europe. Professor Ved Nanda.
Adarniya Adityanji, my respected colleagues, my Sadar Namaskar, Pranam to everybody. I look around and I see so many people who can speak much better than I can, even on this subject, but I would be delighted to share my thoughts with you. I requested Adityanji to say 2 words about me, and I am overwhelmed, but thank you very much, Adityanji. I can't say anything more about it. I'm sorry to say that the story I'm going to tell you is a grim one. Today, as we look at all that's happening with the corona, COVID-19, and especially in Bharat, and not a day goes by before we hear that one of our dear friends, somebody we knew, is gone. I think these are husband, wife, brothers, sisters, friends. And I think that this time in Bharat, today's figure is 250,000, come down from 400,000. But today's figure again is 4,200 deaths, and even one is too many. So I think at this time, instead of blame game, all that we can do is pray and hope and wish that this plague leaves us alone. So the story I'm going to say is not a very pleasant one. I wish I could do that, because those I'm going to talk about are the ones who have got little visibility, they have got little voice, they have got practically no recognition. And the topic is Europe, but I have no idea how many of you, because some of you are not on video, but how many of you know how many Roma people are in the United States? Those who know can raise their hand. Those who are on video, I don't see a single hand. 1 million Romani people. And I'm going to use the word Romani, not Roma, because they have got so many different small groups, and I won't name them. I've got right here 7 of them, but Roma is one of them. So the Romani people, 1 million of them in this country. And I want to take you back in history. It was 1939. And at that time, the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, she met with a Roma leader, name was Steve Kaslow. It was in New York City. And they talked. And then history tells us that she wrote at that time, and I'll quote her, "They are a sad people, a minority group. I feel we should try to help." That was obviously a historic occasion. And since that time, they have been here, and we don't know about them. And I need to tell you that I am one of you who did not know much about the Romani people until just a few years ago, one of my students, as I was talking about minorities, I teach human rights, and I mentioned so many other minorities in this country as in others. And he said, what about Roma? And I said, because he said Roma, I said, yes, I know. I know about their plight in Europe. I have looked into it. He said, what have you done about looking in this country? And I said, I don't really know about them. And then he introduced me to a Romani person that I talked with, and he told me where they are. And they are in many cities, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and I looked at these cities, about 8, 10 cities. In Denver, we don't have too many Romani people. And again, the same thing, invisible. Wherever they are, they feel that the police hounds them. And many times they hide their identity because they want not to show that they are Romans. And so that is the kind of setting. And I think you probably don't know that in one of these universities, and it's next door to me, so I won't name the university, it's not in the state of Colorado, but that university has a Gypsy Day that they celebrate every year. They have at that time all kind of hate, kind of anecdotes about them.
आप कौन सी गाड़ी कह रहे हो?
Names. That's all right. I think somebody else has got a right to speak. This is a free country. So that's the kind of setting that is there, because as I came here and I started teaching human rights, I think the very first group that came to me, and that was Native Americans, and the issue was genocide. And I went to Geneva with them in order to plead to the European, not the European, the UN Commission on Human Rights. Obviously, nothing happened. But I did not know about Romans. So I think I'm going to leave that in the United States here, but their plight. But I do want to tell you that at Harvard, they have got a study that they are doing on Roma. It began 8 years ago, and last November 2020, they, along with the Voice of Roma, this is a non-profit based group in California, and their own Center for Health and Human Rights. And they presented a study. So I think since the talk is about Europe, I won't go into any details, but I do want to mention to you that study. And in that study, they found what has happened in Europe also, that they are stigmatized. They are at times seen as criminals, as people who steal. They are seen as people who have stolen children, trafficked them. So all kinds of those kind of stereotype about them that is also present, not simply in Europe, but in the United States. Let me say a couple words about them. There is a long-standing discrimination in this country as well. They are seen as unclean. They are seen as people uncivilized. They are seen as people sources of contagion. And as I looked at this study, it's a breaking the silence, challenging the stereotype Romani people in the United States. And pillars of that behavior about them, where you can see the problems, and let me simply mention them to you: health, education, employment, housing, and all of them discrimination against them. Those of you who would like to read that study, It is Romani realities in the United States, breaking the silence, challenging the stereotypes. And the study is November 2020. So let me briefly mention to you, Aditya mentioned about the study. The study is done. I have not presented it because I still want to polish it. And it's not done because of our deadlines. But today what I intend to do is very, very briefly say a few words to you, with you. And then I would like very much for you, not simply to ask questions, but if you know things, if you want to make comments, please do so, because I like to hear from you and learn from you. So I'm going to start with the history. And then I would like to look at current challenges in Europe. And then I would look at very briefly efforts both at the United Nations and in Europe, what has happened about them. Let me go to history and very briefly. Their origin until recently has remained kind of a mystery. But in 2016, in Europe, they did a wonderful study. And this is the European Journal of Human Genetics. And it presented their study. It's 2016. And they looked at all kind of linguistic, cultural, genetic, anthropological evidence. Based upon that evidence, they concluded that this population originated on the Indian subcontinent. Then they have done some further studies, and it is that from Rajasthan and from Punjab, almost 1,000 years ago, they left the part. And they arrived in Europe around 1,000 years ago. Most Roma stayed in the Balkan Peninsula because they had gone through Persia, Armenia, and Balkans, and then Eastern Europe. And there are many in Europe that until recently kept thinking about them that they came from Egypt. But in any event, they stayed in Balkans, many of them. Others went to Romania, Moldova, parts of Hungary, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They moved into Central Western Europe, and then it keeps going. But one thing I want to mention to you, that they became slaves practically in Romania, and for several hundred years. And then they went around and spread all over the world. I think I'm going to stop here about the history of them. But then Romania, since I mentioned that, maybe I should mention to you that today they are seen as modern slaves. Associated Press, a few months ago, had a story from Romania. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to see what they do. Many of them in parts of Romania, what they do is simply burn plastic. And that foul smell, reek of that, where they live all around, you could feel that. And what do they do with it? They are trying to get some metal out of it and selling metal in order to see that they survive. And that story, as I read, and I had done some work about Romania, I was very, very upset. And we have a student, and I, through him, reached out to Romania and found out that the story that I had read was true. In Romania, what they had done was that after the COVID breakout, they simply blocked their own area where they live in a way that nobody could leave that place. They couldn't go anywhere because they thought that these are the people who are going to be spreading this COVID virus. So I think as I look at all these studies, and there are plenty of them, their plight is absolutely miserable state that they live in. Let me mention to you a few countries, but one more study. These are two survey experiments in Norway that they completed recently. And those surveys again told how these people are being hounded by police, stereotyped, laughed at, not permitted to have any voice. And many of them, as in many other countries, Romani people, they hide their identity. And during the pandemic, I think racism in Europe had been just absolutely reached the pinnacle, the height of that discrimination. In April last year, European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Council of Europe, they again did a study about the problems that they have. And they found out that from Slovakia to Romania and Bulgaria, that states have enacted disproportionate militarized measures in order to target Romani neighborhoods or Romani towns. Collective health and safety threat they felt that these people were. And those measures included roadblocks, as I mentioned, police checkpoints, several Romani neighborhoods. No evidence was that they were spreading COVID-19, but what they did was they really reduced all those where they live, that population in ghettos. And they felt that these were the quote unquote nests of contagion. I don't need to do that. This is just full of all those forced evictions, forced migration, and their search for survival. And that is the way that these people were treated there. Let me just very briefly go over the countries that we looked at and what those countries showed us. My students and I assisted them primarily their work initially. They looked at several things. One, hate speech and hate crimes against them. Second, we looked at housing. Third, we looked at education. Fourth, we looked at employment and healthcare. And the countries I want to mention to you, which we studied: Czech Republic, and in all of them, these 4 or 5 areas that I mentioned, we looked into them. We looked into the case law that happened in these countries, then cases that went to the European Court of Human Rights. And the European Court of Human Rights time and again said that these governments had discriminated against the Roma by placing a disproportionate number of Roma children in remedial schools, by not permitting them in employment. Then we looked at, along with that, Romania, and we went from there to Hungary. From Hungary, I'm just turning those pages. I could have simply looked at them. United Kingdom. And let me say a word about the United Kingdom, because I just read a piece by one of those Romani people that he did in British newspapers. And what he said simply was that for a number of years, whenever he talked about being a Romani, he was discriminated. But then he said for a number of years, he did not even say that he's a Romani. And then he studied, he even got his PhD. I found another one who had written about the United Kingdom, how in Britain, he and his family had been under a great deal of discriminatory treatment, and he did not feel wanted. He did not feel that he had any place, wanted to commit a few times suicide. Then we looked at Italy. And the point simply is that in many of these countries, as I have traveled, and I have seen the plight of these people, Romani people. And the sad part is that when they talk about Romani people who steal or who want to cause trouble, they keep telling you that they have seen Romani people, that many of them would come around you, and then they would present you with such a sad kind of plight of theirs, and then they would try to distract you, and they would try to steal whatever they can steal from you. So that is the kind of setting that we see at the present time. Let me take you to what has happened in Europe. The European Commission, the Council of Europe, European Parliament, not that they are not familiar with the problem, and they have started talking about it from the beginning of the 21st century. In 2020, they started doing things, and before that, they also had done, not this century, but 2020. And before that, they had also arranged some kind of an effort in order to bring them to equality, inclusion, and participation. As you know, this in this country, we've been talking about, again, the same kind of thing, equality, and at the same time, diversity, equality, and inclusion. And what they have said is equality, inclusion strategies, and those strategies that began several years ago. Then they had from 2010 to 2020, 10-year period, where they thought that they would like to see that the poverty gap is reduced. They would like to see that these people are given employment. But at the present time, these more than 6 million Romanis, that all those areas that I mentioned to you, they have been denied any equality. They are the largest ethnic minority. They are more than 6 million in Europe. And now Europe has, last October, started another, it's called EU Framework on Roma Equality and Inclusion Strategies. What they have decided this time is that they are going to reduce 50% the problems and challenges that they had, and they would double the reporting of those people who suffer from these discrimination. 50% the poverty gap they would reduce now. 95% of Roma, they would like to see that they have access to tap water. Their life expectancy that has been at least 10 years or more, less than the others in Europe, that they would like to close the gap on that. And they would see that anti-gypsyism stops, that violence and police harassment does not continue. What has happened in the past is that there is European Union's Fundamental Rights Agency. And it had been doing that kind of effort to assist them. Nothing really has happened. The United Nations also has been asking the European Union and European Commission to take action. But I looked at the results of their work from 2010 to 2020, and actually not much had happened. Now at the present time, all that they have done, my students, we looked at their strategies and we looked at what the implementation measures are. And our recommendations to the European Union and the European Parliament was that this strategy, as the past one, is not going to succeed because it's toothless. Why do I say that? Because there are no mandatory targets. There is no earmarked funding. There is no demand that countries implement it, enforce it. It's voluntary. It is the same thing that has happened many, many times in this country when on the environmental issues, it has been left to corporations, it has been left to individuals to take action. And unless then the state comes into the picture, it demands by legislation, by enforcement, by implementation, the outcome remains the same. Not much changes. There is a great deal of talk, but not much action. There's bark, but no bite. And that really has happened at the present time with Europe. Only 43% of Roma are in employment. Education is not there. Labor market participation is not there. So we have said there must be mandatory targets. There must be earmarked funding. And we have said that countries have got to make this what we usually call diversity and equity and inclusion, that ought to be done by countries, by legislating it, by ensuring that in all these areas, implementation occurs, and then there be some kind of a measuring rod, evaluation, assessment, reporting of that assessment. And I think I'm going to probably stop so that we can have comments and questions. I wanted to speak only for 10, 15 minutes. I've taken a little longer, but the purpose simply was to mention to you how much is there to be done, how much these people have been totally ignored. And this documents are wonderful. This is a Roma strategic framework for equality, inclusion, and participation for 2020 to 2030. And, it's a single space and so many pages and so specific and concrete demands, but absolutely no enforcement, no implementation, and no demands that states do anything. It simply demands that this be done. How is it going to be done if there are countries who not only take no action, but at the same time, they are the ones who are responsible for all these discriminatory measures that they have taken. So COVID-19 has taken a special toll on the Romani people. And Romani people have been totally ignored by almost every country in Europe. Every country in Europe talks about taking care of them, and every country in Europe has a total blind spots about the problems that they have, challenges that they have. Obviously, there is problem with them also, because their nomadic style has not changed. They move and they have moved from place to place. And it's a problem because they move because they don't have the opportunity in those places. So I think I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask you to make any comments, ask any questions. I've got so much material with me, and therefore this is kind of disjointed presentation on my part, because I'm unable to see how in a very short period of time I can make some sense of all these all documents and materials. But as I present this study for this wonderful group that Adityanji heads, I think I would probably have it disseminated widely so that you can look at it. I think, again, let me go back to it. I began by saying that I wish I could present to you a rosy picture. Unfortunately, I can't. And this is the story that need to be told. And especially in this country, in the United States, where there are a million of them. And again, those million invisible, and those million not recognized, and those million having no voice. Kindly think about them, and think about them especially because these are the people who left India. These are the people who still have that, not part of that culture remaining, but that is where they came from. Adityanji, thank you. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Professor Nanda, for this detailed but sad story about Romani people. These are really, truly voiceless people. These are the orphans of the world for whom no government, no international organizations claims patronage or ownership. And I think as an international human rights organization, it is our duty and responsibility to do policy interventions, to do direct interventions with the Romani communities so that their human rights are respected, their issues about cultural and religious freedoms are respected. Before I start reading the questions from the chat function, and there are questions in the chat function, and I'll encourage anyone who wants to ask a question to just type it down using the chat function. I'll share some personal observations. As a physician and psychiatrist, I've treated Roma people in this country as well as in England. And I shudder to remember the response of the nursing staff and other paramedical staff whenever a Romani patient was admitted. They will be sort of, hush hush voices, watch for your wallet. This person is, from Roma community, they might steal this. The derisive and pejorative attitude towards the people about their personal hygiene, the stereotyping was abysmal. So I can share you from my experience as a physician and psychiatrist. It's very rare people of Romani origin get hospitalized, but whenever they got hospitalized, the staff reaction was really very negative and pathetic. I don't know how they were trained, whether they were cultural competences or cultural sensitivities trained in this day and age in United States, that people had such biased and bigoted, opinions about Romani people. So I'll start with the first question. It is from Mr. P.V. Ravichandran. And the question states, is the Romani community in the United States preserving their ethics and cultural identity? Professor Nanda.
I really don't know. I think the point simply is that they are spread all over. And then they, throughout these 1,000 years, have changed. And they have, some of them became, most of them Christians, some of them Muslims. They don't remember anything, but they do remember their language is still has a Sanskrit kind of derivation. They still have some of those traits that they began with when they left. They are still there, but there isn't that relationship with Bharat that began that at the present time you can see that in Trinidad and Tobago, in Fiji, in Guyana, in Suriname, all those who went from here as indentured labor. And I have been to all these countries, and you have also gone there, and you feel that they have kept their identity alive. They are, as Hindus, more Kattar Hindus than we are in most instances. And but no, that kind of cultural trait in Romani people is not there.
Thank you. There are a number of comments and supplementary information from a number of individuals, including Professor Tej Parikh, Mr. P.V. Ravichandran, Mr. Ashok Chowgle, and these pieces of information are very informative. There are several genetic studies cited by Mr. P.V. Ravichandran. There are some comments from Mr. Surendra Sharma that he visited them, and their guards and goddesses are in a fort in Alwar. But there is a question again from Mr. Vibhu. Is it on US Romani people, what culture and religion do they practice? Professor Nanda?
I think the ones that I came to know, they had become Christians.
Yes.
And I found out that what they do practice is they are kind of very ancient practices still that they have. But beyond that, I have not spent a whole lot of time with them. I wish I could, because in Colorado, there aren't many Romani people, and those who are there don't really show themselves as Romani and as individuals who would need some help, or a small group that has got demands. So really, I feel very uncomfortable and incompetent to really answer that question in any detail. I wish that one of you who might have spent some time with them can speak about the United States Romani people. I know that in Britain, there are people who have, our own people who have come in contact with them, also in Europe. And I know that ICCS probably has been trying to be working with them at the present time from Bharat. The Vishwa Hindu Parishad people have now started looking into these minorities that had left India or had some relationship with India, and even those minorities that have ancient traditions in Europe and in Latin America. But here in the United States, I don't think that we have done, or VHP or ICCS has done a great deal of work in trying to find them, because I have had very recently understood and appreciated their plight in this country, and especially after this study that came out of Harvard. And I have not really taken the time to get in touch with the Harvard School and to find out from them where they are and how to get in touch with them and how to work with them if there are some minority community Romani in cities like Los Angeles and New York. but unfortunately I haven't. But I would be very pleased to hear that someone can give us some enlightenment and guidance on it. If there is anybody here in the group, and we've got about 30 people, and some of them might have some understanding, please share it.
So next question is from Mr. Ankush Bhandari. What has been done in the USA for these Romani communities? Has it been brought to the US Congress about their plight? If not, then we should push for a bill for their settlement and preservation of their cultural identity.
Very good comment. I think what has happened is that I found out that after this study last October by the last year by the Harvard School, that they sent that study to Congress. And I think there's probably one congressperson who is keen to bring their plight to the attention of Congress. But I think, as you probably know, dysfunctional Washington does not move unless there is a great deal of interest. And at the present time, with all that's happening in Washington, I have very, very little, even a prayer that something about them in Congress will happen this year or in the next few years. I think where the hope lies is that in these cities where they are, Los Angeles or New York or other places, that if an effort is made in those cities, that the city government or the state might do something, there is hope. I don't put a whole lot of can bet against it that Congress is not going to move a whole lot about them.
The next question is from Professor Tej Parikh from Cleveland, Ohio. And the question reads, India should be natural moral protector of Romani people. Has Indian government taken any stand on their rights? Do governments have any role to play here? Can we do something in our own cities or state to support their voice?
I can simply mention that personally, and that doesn't really mean much. I have had, from the time that Atal Bihari Vajpayee was there, even personally meeting him, and I talked about them. But then there is so much on their plate that the Indian government really has not taken lead on it. I did not send anything to Modi ji, but I had thought about it that I should. But I have spoken with the people in VSP in Bharat who are undertaking this kind of study, and I have requested them that they do bring the issue before the government. And I think the point you're taking is a very good one, making is a very good one, Professor, because, nationals, that is the duty and obligation of a state to fight for them. As you probably know here, one person who has been kept a detainee in Iran, we fight for them. This government fights for it. A person in any other country that is not being treated right as an American, the state stands by him. And the point simply is that there are so many challenges that Bharat has and the Indian government has on its radar that this kind of issue has not really surfaced as the one that they can take care of. Because I don't need to make any comparisons, but think about the Kashmiri Hindus, Kashmiri Pandits, their plight. All these years in Bharat, in Jammu, in Delhi, and I have gone and visited them, and you have done that, many of you, and you have spoken at their conferences and on their platforms, and I can count about at least 20 of them that I've spoken at and called upon the government of India to do something about them. And at the present time, the Modi government began and has taken some action, but still far from any credible action that the governments can take about Romani people. No government has done anything. And Bharat, that ought to do, has had its hands full, and Romani people do not really matter in terms of priority.
So the next question is from Dr. Shobha, and the question is, do we have an association for Roma Americans in the US? She further comments that it is against the law to discriminate against anyone on base of country or ethnic origin here. And since they are lawful citizens and peaceful, we should be connecting this group to the US senators and other political groups so that there is some resolution legally for protecting their status and further intervention in terms of their vocational, educational, rehab, etc. So that is the spirit of the question, Professor Nanda.
I think it's again a very good suggestion, but my suggestion would be that not to depend upon the central government and not to depend upon Washington, but in those places where they are, I think somebody, and I think I would probably look into the possibility as I teach human rights this fall. And I think this is one issue that I'll probably pursue with my next group of students. These are obviously PhD and MA from the Corbell School of International Studies, and my law students, both JD and LLM. So I think I will probably spend some time to see what action can be taken in this country, because really when we have studied Roma, we have not really studied much about the United States. Even in my class, we haven't done that. So I think this year, today's this session and your comments that something should be done about them, I think I'll probably like to look into the possibility of Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, and obviously those states, California or Illinois or New York, to see if we can possibly look into the possibility of assisting them in some fashion.
So the next question is from Mr. P.V. Ravichandran, and this is basically echoing the same thing as Dr. Shobha asked. Is there a pan-United States Romani association to enable Romani community to interact and liaise? And Professor Nanda has already kind of answered that, but that is, same kind of question / suggestion from two different people sitting in different parts of the world. So that is good.
Adityanji, there is in the chat a suggestion that one of our distinguished colleagues here is going to talk with Swami Vijnananandji. And I think he has been in touch with me, and I have told him that this study that I'm going to do, he has asked me to complete it and send it to him. And as I give this study to Adityanji, I'm going to send that study to Vijnananandji. But he is the one, and the suggestion was that one of our colleagues is going to talk with him about it. And I simply want you to know that he's already aware of it, and he has deputed me to help him in conducting this study.
So there are a number of basically supportive comments, etc. Work done by other groups, including Isha Foundation, Arts of Living, etc., etc. And I think it is good that people are getting aware of the plight of the Roma people, and people are willing to take remedial actions so that a group of disenfranchised, voiceless people are uplifted because entire world has given up on them. I think in 2014 in the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, late Honorable Sushma Swaraj had recognized the Romani people as the true PIOs, the original persons of Indian origins. So there was some recognition, but as far as Government of India is concerned, there are limited resources. There is a question from Arvind Tripathi. Is United Nations declarations on the rights of indigenous people anyway helpful for Roma people? Professor Nanda.
I think that declaration is wonderful, but again, as you know, it's simply a declaration. There is no binding force behind it. It's not a treaty. No country has assumed any obligation under it. I think under that declaration, obviously, Romani people also can say that we are to have our own culture recognized, our language recognized. There's not one language, they've got plenty of them. So I think it's a very, very decentralized and I shouldn't say fractured, but obviously uh, disparate kind of groups that are Romani people. The common thread is that they all came from Bharat. The common thread is that they are Romani. But beyond that, there isn't at the present time a whole lot that binds them together. What has happened is that there are presently in Europe many Romani experts from Romani people, and they are now at least reaching a stage where they are trying to have their feeble voice be recognized and heard. But at this stage, there isn't really much beyond that. I think I need also to say to you that, this, although we're a small group today, but I'm so pleased to see that kind of an interest. And here in Colorado, as in many other places, there is a group of people. This is Friends of India in Colorado. And Yashodhanji, I thought, is on the program. Madhuji is on the program. A few people from Colorado are on the program. And I think they have been fighting for recognition of people from Bharat and Indian challenges and problems. And perhaps they might also undertake this as one of their many items for consideration and giving priority.
So we are coming to the end of our session. Just for sake of bringing it to everyone's awareness, during the Second World War, we know about the Jewish Holocaust, but we need to remember the Holocaust of the Romani people. 1 million people of Romani origin were exterminated by the National Socialist government of Germany. And I think that fact is forgotten by many because the Holocaust just refers to the Jewish Holocaust. So there is an additional minority that was seriously affected, persecuted, exterminated on grounds of national origin, religion, racial, and ethnic background. In fact, the Nazi Party, or the so-called National Socialist Party, had labeled them as quote-unquote inferior people, quote-unquote vermins. So that history is there. It is very recent, and we should not forget that. Lastly, there is a memorial to the Romani victims of National Socialism in Berlin. If people do visit once the COVID is over to Europe, please visit this Romani memorial to the victims of extermination and Holocaust of Roma people. I'm very, very thankful to Professor Nanda to enlighten us on the current status of this persecuted minority. And it has been persecuted actually in the quote unquote civilized Europe, the civilized United States, and the state in all the states. The state as an institution in all these states is basically in deep slumber, not taking action to uplift these people who have been disenfranchised. So with all this, I will thank all of you for attending this session. The recording will be available on our website. We will also be taking up the comments that are given in the chat comments and function. We will be collating all these, comments and start making a nucleus of group of activists who can take the cause of Roma people. Talking is not enough. Talking has to lead to some meaningful, concrete action. And that is what we will try to do. We will also wait for the research report Professor Nanda and his postdoc students at Cornell School of International Law in University of Denver are working on. Once that report is released, we will publish on the ICHRRF website. I may say that as an international human rights organization, we are the friends and well-wisher of Roma people, and we will do our utmost best to uplift the fate of these unfortunate people. Thank you.
Aditya, before you conclude, just to add a footnote, and that is that what you mentioned is exceptionally important. At this time, what happens is that anytime you talk about Holocaust, and then people talk about Romani or Gypsies being killed, it's simply an addendum. It's simply an add-on. It's simply something that along with those 6 million, certainly that's 6 million, certainly this was a few 100,000. But the point simply is it's not an addendum. This Romani people and their extermination, and it goes back. And as Adityanji mentioned, kindly keep in mind that the Nazis, they had specially targeted them even before that. There it was anti-Semitism. Here it was anti-race on racism. So keep that at the back of your mind. It should not be seen simply as an addendum. It's an important part, and they should be remembered as Romani people, part of that Holocaust. Holocaust is not simply Jewish people. It was there. That's very important. But I am simply underscoring it again, not to forget them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nanda. We are grateful that indeed you were able to talk on this very, very emotionally sensitive topic. I thank all the audience members. A number of people have volunteered. They have specialized expertise, so we'll be getting in touch with all of you. So it is not the end of this seminar, it's beginning of a new era. That is what I would say. Namaste to everyone.
Sadhana namaskar, everyone, and thanks.
Thank you, Vedji.
Thank you.